So now that we've talked about what's happening at the SA node, we need to look at things from a little bit different perspective as well, because the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system not only have the chronotropic effects, these are our chronotropic effects, and in this case there's considerably more parasympathetic activity because during rest and most of our life the parasympathetic system is keeping our heart rate down. However, we have another type of effect called dromotropic effects. And dromotropic effects is essentially the sympathetic nervous system innervating the cardiac tissue and then spreading some excitation throughout the atrium and the AV node. So we can get a difference in contractility. So when we look at things, we want to look at it from how do we control our heart rate right here, and then how do we control our stroke volume. And stroke volume, we can look at it from the aspect of the ventricular and diastolic volume versus the stroke volume. So, and we'll put this in milliliters, and then and diastolic volume in milliliters. So 0, 100, 200 mils over here, 100, 200, 300, 400. And then it'll look something like this. And then right here is our normal resting value. Now let's move it out just a little bit, about 130. Oops, sorry about that. Right here. So that's our normal resting. And if we were to increase our stroke volume over on this side, let's increase it to here. It shows us that we've increased our end diastolic volume by increasing our stroke volume. So that's saying that our stroke volume is proportional to our end diastolic volume, or any increase in venous return or more blood entering into the ventricle to stretch it a bit more is going to increase stroke volume. Because we can look at this as just essentially a length tension curve, because as we increase the length, the more tension we get on it. The cardiac myocyte is a little bit different because it's not resting tension is not near the optimal length. So there is some play with contractility. So when we look at contractility, we need to take into account the sympathetic nervous system once again. So when we add sympathetic stimulation, we're going to have a curve that looks something like this. So our normal resting value is right here. When we add sympathetic stimulation, our new resting value is right here, showing us that we're getting more, our stroke volume has increased. But if we increase our end diastolic volume, let's say we're exercising and more blood is being returned to the heart via the vena cava, we'd be around here somewhere, and our contractility from normal resting range has increased as well. So we would be able to increase our stroke volume and our end diastolic volume. So you can see how sympathetic stimulation causes an increased contractility of ventricular muscles. Stroke volume is increased at any given end diastolic volume. So as we increase end diastolic volume, we're always increasing stroke volume. But we want to look at it from another aspect too. We can look at it from force development. Time, seconds, force. I'm just going to put force during contraction. So if we're just during a normal contraction, we're sitting at rest, we're going to produce this force, a nice bell curve, increase force, contract, relax. But if we add the sympathetic nervous system input into it, we're going to generate much more force over a shorter period of time. This is more of a bell curve. Let me try to fix this. Like that. Sorry, artwork is a little rough this morning. So under the sympathetic nervous system, we see that we can produce a lot more force than at rest, but it happens over a shorter period of time. So it's a quick twitch and ready for the next heartbeat. So we need to understand from this aspect, sympathetic stimulation, we've produced more force over a shorter period of time. That's going to suggest that our heart rate is increasing compared to our control or our resting. One last thing to think about, these are all inotropic effects. So anything that increases in contraction at a given end diastolic volume is said to have inotropic effects. And then this curve right here, this is called the Frank-Starling mechanism. And it's essentially just telling us that as we increase end diastolic volume, the myocyte stretches more towards an optimal length, and we increase stroke volume. That's essentially what it's telling us. One last thing to think about is we want to quantify contraction. So we've talked about contractility as well, but we wanted to quantify it. So if you were at the doctor's office, they would be looking at more of an ejection fraction. And this is a way of quantifying the ratio of stroke volume to end diastolic volume. So it equals stroke volume divided by end diastolic volume. And under normal conditions, it's going to be between 50 and 75%. And as you're exercising, that will increase.